Thank you. It's great to be here. I guess I should turn on my mic. That would be good. Is that okay? Is that better? Am I on? Okay. Well, thank you. For those of you who know a little psychology, you've probably heard of the primacy-recency effect, which is most places you want to either be first or last, and the worst place to be is in the middle. And if you're a middle child, how many middle children in the room, you certainly personally understand that. So there are certain strategies you need to use. I'm going to do my best here, and I'm looking to the middle children to really support me and help me here so we can have a really interesting and vibrant conversation. So I think Stan has laid out for you, as he always does, so clearly and articulately certain clear steps that we need to engage in order to up the ante on college completion, and that can have a dramatic impact on our numbers. And I thank you for allowing me to be here with you today as you continue your work to mobilize, and that's what I want to focus on today, is the way today we have business leaders, we have K-12 leaders, we have higher ed leaders, and we're talking about mobilization, particularly in regions, around getting this done. And so I think the structural changes that Stan talked about are absolutely essential on the campuses. I want to talk a little bit about what it takes to really mobilize a region so you have all the players aligned and pulling in the right direction, because I think that's another piece of the strategy that has to be in place. And I know that's what you want to do in terms of bringing your communities together, business leaders, K-12, higher ed, community leaders. We work a lot with foundations, private foundations and community foundations in Georgia, all sorts of players, advocacy groups and community-based organizations that work in your communities with those students that we need to serve better. And that's the only way we really begin to change the nature of the terrain so that we can secure an educationally vibrant economy and democracy for Georgia. As was mentioned, I spoke last year at the Complete College Georgia launch at the Governor's Mansion. And it was a very important beginning step, as several speakers have said, setting a goal. Someone said last night at dinner, and I'm going to misquote Yogi Berra, but if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get there, right? But you've set this goal, but now you're in the midst of what is the real work to really begin to figure out what's the playbook, what are the partnerships we need, and what are the playbooks we need to really get from A to B, to get to this 250,000 number, to get to this 60% goal for Georgia. This summit reflects another very important step along that path. The audacious goal is one thing, but as I said, bringing together the right players committed to collaboration, partnership, and alignment of action to realize that goal is where the rubber really hits the road. Now, as I reviewed and looked at all the different plans that the campuses had provided in your packets, and I remembered that I believe you play a little football here in Georgia. And it struck me, there's an analogy here, that you can't win unless you have the right plays and unless people are implementing those plays with fidelity on the field. But on the other hand, simply having the right plays, and those of you who know a little about sports know this, is not all that it takes. Well-executed plays are only a part of the chemistry that is needed to achieve success. It also takes a passion and commitment to win and a commitment to work together in collaboration as a team. So I'm here today with you and excited to be here today with you because I know you are here to address the most important challenge faced by our country and Georgia and all of our states and our communities as well. I was just talking to a president from Atlanta and your various regions and cities. We work in Savannah with our Latino student success work. And that is to secure a future in which our children have a shot at living a life, having a quality of life that represents something like what many of us, looking around the room and seeing some people who look a lot like me, have privileged to have in the last 60 years. You've come together because you know that meeting this challenge will be essential to our economic well-being, our democracy, and our commitment as Americans to the sense of opportunity and social justice for all of our people. And you're here today because you also know one other very important thing, that we cannot secure our future unless our education system in Georgia, in New York, in Illinois, in Arizona, in Texas, where I'm going tomorrow, begins to our education system begins to reassume, reassert, call out its role as a pathway to opportunity for those who need it most, and to begin to shed the policies and practices that, frankly, when you look at the data, I'm going to share a little of that with you here in just a moment, has made our education system in the United States as much a system for the reproduction of privilege as it is for the provision of opportunity. And I know you're here because you're devoting your work to that imperative. So thank you again for inviting me here to speak to you, and I hope today I can arm you or provide you, I don't want to use a military metaphor here, but provide you with ideas that you can take home to use in your regions in making the case for broad-based support across your region to continue to build the collaborations that will make your community and your quality of life so much better, and the future of hundreds of thousands of students in Georgia so much better because of your work to raise education levels. Somewhere here I have misplaced my clicker. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Too many pieces of technology. So in the, that's not me, that's my ringer, but it's not me. I thought I turned it off. As I don't want to assume all of you know who the Lumina Foundation is and what we're about, but we're the largest foundation in the United States that's solely devoted to one goal, and this is it. That's all we do. Everything we do is devoted to increasing the percentage of Americans, this should sound a little familiar to you here in Georgia, to hold high quality, and I want to emphasize that, I'll talk about that in a moment, college credentials to 60% by 2025. Now, we have been stuck at about 40% in this country for decades. And decades ago, that was good enough to make us pretty much first in the world. But that is no longer the case. Complete College Georgia, you set your goal to 2020. So you're more ambitious and probably smarter than we are. But if you can get there by 2020, that'll help us get to our 2025 goal. So we're completely aligned. So the question becomes, how do we get there? And I think it's very important to begin to think about where do these degrees come from. And I want to talk a little bit about that nationally and also in the state of Georgia, because they're going to have to come from very specific places and very specific populations, most of whom, frankly, we have done a relatively miserable job of educating to date. So in our most recent plan, which is available on our website, we tried to, when we would say to people, we want to move from 40 to 60%. And that's going to be about 20, you talk about 250,000 degrees here in Georgia, and that sounds audacious. For the country, that's about 23 million more degrees than we're on track to produce. Now, it's about that point when I use that number that many people run screaming from the room. And so we thought we better lay out how exactly we're going to pull that off nationally. And it's very akin to the kind of ideas you're having here in Georgia in terms of your path to success for Complete College Georgia. But when you get down to the state level, or we work a lot in metropolitan regions, when you start talking about Miami or San Antonio or Phoenix or Atlanta, the numbers become even more doable. But here's the way we do it nationally. If we could improve high school graduation and college going rates, and I know many of you in your completion plans have included components that include more vibrant and effective partnerships with K-12, which is what that's about. If we could raise those levels to levels that are not even as good as the best states in the United States, not as high, but better than where we are, and we've laid all this out in the plan, that produces almost 4 million additional degrees. If we could improve and seal the pipeline, Stan just talked about some of the things we need to do that, to improve the college completion rates across our country, again, to higher levels than we are now, but still not as good as the best institutions are doing, either at the 2 or 4 year level, that would produce another over 5 million degrees. And I want to talk in a lot about adults, because a lot of times in these conversations, I know that in Georgia you're focused on this, but we end up talking about the kids, and the kids are important. The kids are cute. The kids are embraceable, right? But largely, when we look at our workforce, our current workforce in the country right now, the real opportunity is among adults. Adults who did not go to college at all, because at some point they decided, and perhaps when they graduated from high school, there was a decent job for them. I'll show you how that's changing in just a moment. Or those who went to college, and because of our college dropout rate, and we have, as you well know, not just a high school dropout problem in this country, we have a college dropout problem. but there are around 36 to 38 million adults in the workforce right now who went to college and left with nothing but credits, perhaps some debt, but no degree or credential to help them in their lives. So if we could just get a reasonably small percentage of those adults, millions of whom have 60 hours or more, we know this, already toward their college degree. Some have 90 hours toward a baccalaureate degree. If we could find a way to get them back, and it's not as easy as it sounds, because they failed once, we failed them once, and now they have complicated lives, and we need to figure out a way to get them back and get them a degree that counts for them in their lives and counts for our economy. That could produce another 7 million. And then Stan mentioned the one-year certificates. We are discovering, working with the Georgetown Center, who will be represented here in just a moment, there are a large number of certificates offered, one sub-associate, sub-baccalaureate, which have tremendous value in the workplace and in terms of employability. And we need to be focusing on those and making people aware of those. And I'll tell you what I find when I talk to a lot of students and people who are first generation or they failed once and want to come back, if you start out by saying to them, you know, you ought to go back to college, and per Stan's numbers, in 6 or 8 years, you'll have a degree. It's like saying you ought to go in your backyard and build a rocket and go to the moon. But when you can say, look, if you can start, here's a pathway where after a certain limited period of time, you're going to get a certificate that has these payoffs for you, and here's how you get it. And then you know what you also find? Many of those students, not all, many of them get that certificate and really go out and fill a skills gap in the workforce, and that's great. But you also find with many of those students, they do that 1 year, and they're like, I can do this. And so they go on. Or if we have the right kind of system, maybe they go to work and then they know they need to come back as the skills escalate. And if we can figure out a system where what they learn there counts when they come back, as opposed to, no, I'm sorry, that wasn't taught here, none of that counts, you've got to start from scratch. If we put that kind of transfer system like you have here together in Georgia, then we begin to build that pathway to degrees and credentials that really make a difference for adults. And you add all that up and we're at 24 million, so we've already beaten our goal. And thinking in those terms around where is your opportunity here in Georgia is what you need to think about, and I want to talk about that a little bit in the time that I have here. But first, I want to say a little bit about what's happening. I love the fact that you're taking this regional approach in Georgia. Because what we've discovered is, and we're going to expand our regional work, metropolitan regions and other regions at Lumina, because here's what we found. As you may have heard the rumor, there's a little bit of a political logjam in Washington. So there's not a lot getting done there. And we find sometimes even at the state level, particularly in larger or more populous states, there are things you can do at the state level that are very important, like the performance funding that's being put in place. But there's still a lot of noise at the state level. But when you get down to a region where businesses are located, where mayors are elected, where higher education institutions and their faculty live, where people, there's a pragmatism in those regions to say, Republican, Democrat, whatever, it doesn't matter. If we don't fix some things in our region, the place where we live will not be as good for us or our children. And so we're very excited about this. And I would recommend to you a whole literature, I'm sure most of you may be familiar with it, has emerged over the last couple of years. The initial articles, a lot of them are in a journal called the Stanford Social Innovation Review, called Collaboration for Collective Impact. And really the problem it's trying to address is this. When we decided we really wanted to work at a regional level, we asked an intermediary, we call them that in philanthropy, someone we gave money to, we asked them to scan the top 50 metropolitan areas in the United States and just count for us the number of programs in those regions that were around college access and success. We don't want to know about third grade reading, not that we don't care, but that's not in our bailiwick, or early childhood. My wife's an early childhood teacher, I deeply care, but we want to know college access and success. The numbers were really quite striking. 5, 8, 12, 18 different initiatives in some regions, all around college access and success. And yet if we have nothing else at Lumina, we have data. And I'm going to share some of that with you just in a moment. When we looked at the data for that region, no dials were moving. Nothing was changing, yet every one of those 18 programs was claiming great success. It's working. Everything's working, but nothing's changing. And so what we said was, what is it going to take to bring together a region where you get the kind of aligned action with all the right partners at the table, the community-based organizations that represent the Latino community and the African American community, the employers who care, who can commit to helping their adult workers come back to college, the higher ed institutions who will open up the pathways, the K-12. What will it take to do that? And this is what it takes. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but there's a lot to be said here about what it takes to really mobilize a region, because it really is important. You can have all the plays in the playbook, but if you don't have the right players, if you don't have the talent, if you don't have the commitment to victory, if you don't have the sense that we've got to work together on this, everybody's off implementing their little play, and what you get are these little islands of excellence, which is what we have across the country right now. This program's doing great. It's really producing results. And this little island program over here. But you don't have the alignment and the synergy and the collaboration that produces the level of impact that you know you need here in Georgia to hit that 60% goal. First of all, I'm going to talk a little more about some of these. I'll highlight them very quickly here. You need to create a sense of urgency. And I think you're working, that clearly is developing here in Georgia. There's a sense that we've got to act. You know, there's an interesting assessment that one organization does of regions. And what they find is regions go through rhythms in their lives. And there's a certain point where a region is in the blame game rhythm. It's like they're all blaming one another for the fact that things aren't getting better. And that's a very hard region to get mobilized. But at some point in many regions, it finally clicks with key people in the region. We got to get this fixed. We've got to do something. And when that happens, that urgency creates, and then you want to begin to look for champions. Champions in your business community, champions in your education community, mayors in political leadership, champions, your community foundations and regional foundations, whoever you can find who will take the lead and be the champion for this kind of mobilization. And then you need to develop a common agenda. And you're doing that here in Georgia. A common agenda where everybody's sort of on the same page of where we're going, what the nature of the problem is, and the kind of rules of the game that we're going to engage in as we partner with one another. It doesn't mean everybody immediately knows all the solutions, but it means they're committed to finding those solutions and using, as I say here, data, shared measurement, mutual accountability, where every organization, which is often the case, is not going to have its own little data system. We track our students over here, and you track your students over here, and everybody's doing it differently. Where you agree to, this is one of the hardest things to do, to come up with a transparent measurement system that says, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, here's how publicly and together we're going to measure our progress, and we're going to find out if we're making progress, and if we're not going to blame anybody. We're going to come together and have those, in Achieving the Dream was mentioned earlier, there's a great phrase that those colleges use around courageous conversations, looking at the data about what really needs to change. And then you need to align activities along a joint plan of action. That's crucial. And then you need to commit to continuous communication. You have to have an infrastructure where the business folk and the education folk and the K-12, higher ed and K-12 and the community-based folk are constantly talking to one another and sharing what they're learning to move the region along. And lastly, I'll talk a little about, you need some kind of a backbone organization that is going to wake up every morning caring about herding the cats and caring about making sure that that collaboration works. Because if you don't, entropy is a principle of life, and ultimately everybody will come together, sing kumbaya, commit to a common goal, and then over time they'll all start going their different directions unless there's somebody waking up every morning saying, remember what we committed to? Come back here, let's do this together, because that's the only way we're going to get it done. So what about creating a sense of urgency? As I say, I think you're well on the road to doing that here in Georgia. But, you know, I wonder if I walked out onto the streets of Athens, or I walked on my way back to the airport, if I stopped off on a corner in Atlanta and said just stopped a person and said, what do you think is the most important priority for Georgia right now? I wonder how many of them would say it's to get that college attainment rate up. I mean, we've kind of got we've kind of, you know, the choir is here. The choir is here. It's important to have a choir because the more people you have in the choir, the louder the music is, and the more likely you are to attract people into the church, right? But we need to create a sense of urgency. Some of this data I'm sure you're familiar with, but there is, there's a sense of urgency in terms of a global sense of competition. And I say this here in Georgia because as Governor Deal knows, as the Chancellor knows, as Ron Jackson knows, Georgia is not just competing with Tennessee, Florida, and Alabama for jobs and businesses. As the Chamber of Commerce knows, you're competing with where I was last year, Singapore and Shanghai and Ireland and these kinds of countries, and for good jobs and good employers, and actually to keep your own people here so they don't move to those places where they can find a talented workforce. And yet, as you probably have heard, among our young workforce, notice this is 25 to 34-year-olds, the future of our workforce, we're 12th in the developed world, 12th. And other countries, even those below us, are moving faster up the ladder than we are. Now, we did increase our education attainment level this last year by an unprecedented amount, 1%. That's the greatest increase we've seen in several years. Korea, in the last assessment, increased its higher education attainment rate in 1 year by 5%. So it's not, we're increasing. We're, like cat's feet in fall. We're moving up. But others are racing forward beyond us, and we have to change that. And just to throw that, so again, to take it to the state level, here's where our states rank in comparison internationally. And there's Georgia, slugging it out with Poland, Chile, and just above Slovenia and Greece for education bragging rights. Okay, so this is not, and we all know in this room that being globally competitive is hugely important for the internal health of our economy. But I will tell you, as I've traveled around the country and given talks to this to various groups and audiences in cities and states and elsewhere, for me to stand up here and say, beat Norway. Everybody doesn't rise up and say, yeah, let's go to work. We got to beat those Norwegians. It really doesn't work that way. So, but let me give you a little data. I'm going to steal a little thunder from our friends at the Georgetown Center because they are our deep friends, our data gurus. But this is a new urgency post-recession. What we saw in this recession was an acceleration of the trends we've seen over the last decade. That blue line is the number of jobs available to high school graduates. During the recession, we lost over 5 million of those jobs, and since the recovery has begun, we've lost more of those jobs. Those jobs available to high school graduates are going away, and most of them are not coming back. I'll give you a quick example of what's happening. It's not just the new jobs, it's the transitioning and changing of the current market. I was talking to some CEOs of utility companies, and 2 of them had worked their way up through the company. They'd started as meter readers, and with a high school or less degree. And because of their grit and determination and hard work, et cetera, it's a great story, right? It's one of those Horatio Alger bootstrap stories. They're now CEO of the company. Well, guess what? Meter reader jobs are going away. We're putting in meters now that are electronically can more accurately, which probably means your bill is going to go up, but in any case, are more accurately convey remotely. And the way you get the only way you can get in the door in these utility companies is what they call a pole climber. That's a person who goes up the pole and works up what's on top. Add to that what's at the top of that pole is so much different than what was at the top of that pole 20, 30 years ago. As the guy said to me, I can't hire anybody without an associate degree or an industry-recognized credential in that area unless I want to create a brownout in some neighborhood. So you can't even get in, and that's happening over and over again. Again, you see for associate degree holders, we did have a loss of 1.6 million jobs. There's pain for everybody in the recession, but we've just about recovered. The job market has just about recovered for associate degree holders. For four-year college degree holders, and I say this, and people really don't believe me, and if you don't believe me, you'll have to talk to the Georgetown Center, and they can make the case for you. But we never lost jobs, even in the depths of the recession, for four-year college degree holders, and we now have almost 2 million more jobs than we did before. Now, everybody's got the anecdote of, I know a college graduate who's working at Starbucks or driving a taxi, right? And it does matter what you major in. It does. But on the other hand, overall, these are the data. So which of those lines would you like your kid to be on? And I love these people. The Chancellor mentioned earlier the siren song of college isn't worth it anymore, and it's cost too much, and we should. Well, ask those people where their kids are going to school, and they'll tell you, and they're going somewhere. And here's another reason for that. So what we found here is, and this is again from Georgetown, but what we found was in 1980, the premium, the lifetime wage premium for a four-year college graduate was about 40%. That's pretty good. That's about right for a well-functioning economy. In 2010, it was 74%, and by 2025, it'll be almost double. Any labor economist in the world will tell you when you're paying that kind of premium for a product, you have a shortage. And it's not efficient and good for the economy. You're spending too much money for goods that are in shortage, and you have less money to invest elsewhere. Now, this is great news for the few, the largely white and SAT gifted who get to go. But for those students who are shut out of this system, it is an economic disaster. And the income inequality that we talk so much about, I'm not sure what we're doing about it so much, but we talk so much about in this country, is largely a post-secondary education opportunity gap in Georgia and across the country. One more piece of data on urgent need for public revenue. How many people in this room in a financially strapped state in the higher education system would like to see the state have $1 billion more to spend in public revenue? Can I get an amen from the folks in Georgia? All right? All right. So this was put out recently by the American Association of Community Colleges, showing that associate degree holders have a 20% increase in weekly earnings from high school graduates. Each BA pays more than $6,000 a year more in taxes. So I did a little in my head math, and so don't hold me to this, but I thought, well, let's assume a certain break between this $250,000, some associate, some baccalaureate, et cetera, and you can easily get to $1 billion in additional public revenue with this move. And so, again, I think it's essential to the health and well-being. Now, here's the deal. You're here to transform this system. Someone used that word last night and this morning, transformational. And you need to do that. Because what we see over the last 2008, 2011 in Georgia, 36.2% of the workforce with a college degree credentialed, 36.2, 36.1, and this last year you made a phenomenal 0.3 of a point to 36.4 increase. Now, I remember the phrase, the operational definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. So that's why you're here today. You're not going to do the same things over and over again. You're going to do it differently. So that's some of the urgency, and I hope that that's the kind of information that you're able to take out to your faculty colleagues, to your community, and say, this is why we've got to act. This is why we've got to collaborate in ways we've never done before. We can't have these siloed islands of excellence anymore. We've got to work together or we will fail together. So also creating these champions. Look for people who have credibility everywhere I go where they have these successful regional collaborations. Credible champions have stepped up from different sectors. Sometimes it's the mayor, and some others. Sometimes it's business leaders. Sometimes it's higher education leadership. Sometimes it's leadership from the community itself and the community foundations. But you need a cadre of champions from administration, faculty, and look to your students to be champions of this. Look to your students. A lot of times I think one of the mistakes we make in some of these efforts to help our students to get to degrees is we approach it with a deficit model. It's like, well, there are these poor students who lack things. And so our job is to go do things to them to give them the things they lack. Now, clearly, there are things that need to be provided. Stan talked about the work in developmental education. But when you really hear the student voices, particularly the students we're most trying to serve, you begin to recognize that they are bringing an enormous number of assets to our campuses. They build on those assets. I had the privilege at one point of being on the selection committee for the Dell Scholarships. I don't know if you're familiar with that scholarship program, but it's a scholarship program that really targets juniors in high school who, frankly, excuse my French, have been to hell and back to get there and get college ready. They have been homeless 2 of the 4 years they're in high school. They've lost parents. They've lost siblings to violence. They've had drug addiction in their family. They've gone to low, and yet somehow they got to that point. And they don't have the 1,600 SATs or the 32 ACTs, but they are near or at readiness standards. And when I read the portfolios of those students, I thought, if these aren't meritorious students, if these aren't people you don't want to have on your campus, if these aren't people you don't want in your business who have shown this level of grit and determination and commitment to achieving their goals, then probably you haven't messed up recruitment and HR system. But and a state and regional leadership, all of that. Faith-based organizations, we're finding a lot of uptake in some of our regions among the faith-based organizations in terms of driving this agenda. And then a common agenda, which is a shared vision for change, a common goal and understanding of the problem, a joint approach to solving it that produces emergent solutions, not a commitment to a predetermined solution. For the faculty in the room, this is curiosity and intellectual challenge. That's what this is. You know, we have faculty doing research on curing diseases, on curing Alzheimer's. This is the similar kind of problem. We need data. We need to keep working to make this work. And I will tell you, too, to keep it from being an islands of excellence kind of piece, it needs to be, I firmly believe this, within a region and within a campus. It has to be a culture change. It has to be a value-driven culture change and a commitment that we're going to set ourselves a goal like we've never had before. We're going to commit ourselves to the well-being of all of our people, and policies and practices grow from that. That way you don't have a place where, you know, as important as developmental ed is, as Stan said, developmental ed's being reformed over here, and a pathways program's going over here, and there's a business partnership over here with this department in the university, but there isn't that overall sense of systemic change. Everybody from the campus safety department to the faith-based churches in the region to the business partners who are talking to their employees about the importance of education for them and their children, it's got to be that kind of data change, and it's got to be data-driven, asset-based. Don't start in your region by saying, oh, we're terrible. We have all these needs. We have all this trouble. Because if you do that's not a way to motivate people. You're terrible. Now get up and do something about it. That's not a strategy, right? So you start by talking about the assets that we have in this region. We have employers. We have institutions. We have assets. We've solved some of our problems, but now how do we move on and solve the next ones and the big ones that we need to solve? As I said, fueled by commitment and curiosity. It needs to be a common agenda focused on access and success. There's no way we get there without vastly increasing the numbers of students who go to college and then making sure that hugely increased percentage of them actually get through it. We can't do it by simply sealing the college pipeline, and we certainly learned over the last 30 years that getting more students onto campus, which we've done, doesn't solve the problem because too many of them don't get out. It's got to be both of those. It's got to be focused on what we call 21st century students. You know, this is, again, from Complete College America. 75% of our 17.6 million undergrads are now juggling these multiple responsibilities. And yet I find over and over again at state capitals and certainly in Washington inside the Beltway, our higher ed policies and even a lot of our practices on campus act as if our students are still full-time living in the dorm, going to football games or something on Saturday. These are not our students. That's my son, and I hope he gets served. I hope the institution I'm paying a boatload of money serves him, but he is in a shrinking minority of the students we need to serve. And we have to almost audit our practices and policies to say, are they providing barriers to the real students we need to serve? And when I've seen campuses do that, CALE, the Council for Adult and Experiential Literacy, has an assessment called the ALFI, the Adult Learner-Focused Institutions. When I've seen institutions do that, it's been an amazing eye-opener for them. They said, well, we just never, I mean, some of this is just like duh, as the cartoon character would say. It's like, well, our service offices are open from 8 to 12, closed at lunch, and then from 1 to 4. Now, I think we've gotten beyond that in most campuses, but not everywhere. And so they're thinking, well, let's see, if you're an adult with a job, that makes it pretty tough to get any services from our organization. So then they begin to do flex time, and they open up later hours and stay open during lunch, and then they tell their employees, you get to do flex time, you can come in earlier or stay later, and they have happier employees because they all wanted flex time anyway, because they too have kids and things, and they wanted a flexible working schedule. So it's a win-win. I mentioned the adults. You've probably seen this data, but just to pick that one group with some college and no degree in Georgia, you have over 20% of your workforce, 1 million plus people who went to college, living in Georgia in your workforce, and need to come back. They actually came here. So again, just to emphasize this point, Louis Soares just did a piece for the American Council on Education on the adult learner. He had a term for them. He called them something different. I can't remember what it was. But he pointed out there are 60 million adults in the current workforce who probably could benefit from a post-secondary credential who don't have one. 60 million total. That's those without any and also those with some college and no degree. Between now and 2020, your goal date, whoops, I didn't do that. Did I? I don't think I pushed anything, but, oh, probably hit a key here. But between now and 2020, our goal date, your goal date, we will produce in this country about 30 million high school graduates. So you do the math. 60 million adults already in the workforce in need of our help, 30 million high school graduates total between now and 2020 in our high school system. It's not that we don't care about those folks, it's just that they can't be our total focus. I liken it sometimes to a large lake with less than optimum education water quality. And there are some streams flowing into that lake, and they're reasonable streams, but they're smaller. If you focus all your attention on improving the water quality of the streams flowing into the lake and don't go out into the lake and begin to pull that water back in and recycle it, none of us will be alive by the time we get to this goal. So it's got to be an agenda focused on equity. You know that. Here are your numbers in Georgia. These gaps are a huge barrier to your goals, especially when you consider that African American, Hispanics, these are the particularly Hispanic, fastest growing populations in the United States. And we have been so comfortable with these gaps over so long a period. And I think we, again, talking about courageous conversations, we have to have a conversation about why have we been so comfortable with these gaps and why have we not felt an urgency to eliminate them. And I will tell you something here, maybe a little controversial, but I will say it because I hear it between the lines, not here, but in places I go, where it's sort of like, well, those gaps are there not because we have a system that is distorted in a way in which it provides opportunity. It's there because of who those people are. It's because of what they don't have. And if we take that kind of attitude, we are lost because we've got to close these equity gaps. Just a little more depth on equity. In 2010, the bachelor's attainment rate among white Americans 25 to 29, our younger workforce, was twice that among similarly aged African American and Latino groups. Of the 49 million American students in the K-12 system, 20 million are African American, Latino, or American Indian. Also, by 2050, the Latino population under age 24 will grow by 137% to 31 million. Last data point, of the 49 million students in our K-12 system, 22 million, 45%, are low income. Students of color, low income students, adults, they've got to be our targets. We do a pretty darn good job of educating wealthy folks in this country. Don't need to worry about them. If you look at the 2010 census among 24-year-olds, 4 out of 5 young people, 24-year-olds in the highest income quartile, already have a 4-year college degree. Among the young people from the lowest income quartile, 1 out of 10. And you know, I'm reminded in this of a video I saw at an America's Promise convening in Washington, where I'll be speaking next week, where they had a video, and it was a very wealthy family in Alabama, and their daughter was bitten by a recluse spider. And they didn't know that. And if you know anything about that, that's deadly for young kids. It dissolves their organs, literally. And she kept getting sicker and sicker, and no one could figure out what was going on, so they took her to the emergency room, and this young emergency room physician figured it out, got her on an ambulance to Birmingham, stayed in the ambulance with her, kept her alive, and saved their daughter's life. That young emergency room physician came from a very poor family in Alabama, and through a lot of luck and happenstance and help, managed to get to medical school and become an emergency room physician. And he saved that wealthy family's life. And when I think about the 9 out of 10 students in the lowest income quartile, when I think, unless you believe that talent and ability to contribute to Georgia's future, America's future, is determined by the wealth of the family in which you're born, think of what we're losing. Think of the diseases that won't be cured, the young children who won't be saved, the businesses who will go out of business or offshore because of lack of talent. Think of the states who will sink under the weight of the increased cost of Medicaid and public assistance and prison programs because they couldn't solve this problem. It's a huge issue for us, and we have to turn it around. And I know that's what Complete Georgia is about. Running out of time here, but I don't want to just, I want to just also mention that a part of what I know you're doing here is really thinking about the quality of the learning you're providing your students. Doesn't do any good to create 250,000 more people with a piece of paper if they aren't really developing the skills and abilities that they need to serve the needs of Georgia, both its economy and its democracy. So we have to think about new ways of delivering learning, as Stan talked about. But we also have to think about what are the learning outcomes we're really trying to achieve. How do we create a learning-focused system? And let me tell you what a learning-based system is. And I know some of you are working on that. It's outcomes-based. We care about what the students learn, not about the amount of time they spend sitting in seats in a classroom. One of my good friends often want to say, if you're focused on seat time, for a student, you're focused on the wrong end of the student, okay? And it's defined by transparent and accessible outcomes. It's student-centric. As Stan talked about, it's structured, open to acceleration. It's open to innovative, affordable delivery models for customized learning at scale. We mass customize everything else in the world. But we can't seem to figure out a way, even with all the new technologies we have, to really adapt the learning so we meet each student where they are. We don't take students and all start them at the same place and end them at the same place when they're all at different places. That's inefficient and it's not student-centered. As I said, it is not focused on seat time, organized around semesters, relying on proxies for learning, like we even see in some of our surveys, people assume quality is associated with how much an institution costs. I mean, you do that on the website, right? You have two items, you look at them, and they look similar. They got similar ratings from customers, but one costs $5 more than the other. You'll pay the $5 extra because you figure, well, if it costs more, it must be better. Well, we got a lot of that in the higher ed system. We got to get down to what really works, and one size does not fit all. So as you develop this urgency around this common agenda, access and success, adults, equity, economic development in our region, flowing from that becomes, then you want to, if you're committed to that, you want to measure it. You want to know whether you're succeeding. You have a more engaged community and greater public will. That's from which the joint plan of action flows, that commitment. And you look for a backbone organization who can help you stay on track through the long haul. And make no mistake about it, as the Chancellor said, this is not a 1 year, a year and a half, a 2-year event. This is a long-term commitment to turn around trends that have been with us for decades and decades and decades. And it's a commitment to common purpose and processes and continuous communication and the development of trust among the organizations working together. So let me conclude simply by saying that I am indeed excited. As Lumina, as an organization, we're excited, which is why we're coming to Georgia in so many ways, about the good work that is going on here in Georgia and the progress you're making. We think there's an opportunity here to indeed be transformational and to change the trajectories for the lives of hundreds of thousands of Georgia students. You know, I quoted this poem, I think, at the governor's mansion, but it's my favorite poem, one of my favorite poems, and I'm going to include it here again because I think it's still relevant, because it's about plans of action and playbooks and maps. Adrienne Rich, who sadly passed away last year, was always one of my favorite poets. I actually performed her on stage, but don't fear, I'm not going to do that here today. But there is a poem she wrote decades ago, and it ends like this. The rules break like a thermometer. Quicksilver spills across the charted system. Whatever we do together is pure invention. The maps they gave us were out of date by years. The maps they gave us were out of date by years. So in the end, it's not about us, our businesses, or our institutions. It's not about politics. It's about them and their future and Georgia's future. And I truly believe that the people in this room with this sense of urgency and this commitment to collaboration for real impact can turn things around in Georgia and be a model for turning things around in this country, so that together we create the new maps. We need to find our way to an educational system that is not a reproduction of privilege, but a pathway to opportunity for those who need it most. An economically successful and, yes, globally competitive economy, Georgia and nation. A more vibrant democracy. In short, what Complete College Georgia to me is about is a renewal of Georgia's commitment to once again be a land of opportunity through education for all of its citizens. Thank you very much.